Hi guys, welcome back to the Astro Imaging channel. Today's session is going to be presented by Josh Smith, and it's on narrowband imaging, color mapping, and replacing narrowband stars. And right now, I'm going to hand it right over to Josh, and he will take it.
Thanks, Adam. Definitely interrupt if there are any questions, and let me know if there are any issues with the video or audio. So I'm going to go over color mapping and replacing narrowband stars tonight. And I guess I will start with a disclaimer that there are practically an infinite number of ways to do this. Most of the ways that I know how to do it have been borrowed from other people, and you can do it with a lot of different programs. Tonight I'm going to focus only on Photoshop. It'll probably be another session where we use PixInsight or some other program to do color mapping, but there's so much to go over. There's not even enough time in one session just to cover how to do it in Photoshop. So I'll get right down to it. I'll start off by just defining what color mapping is, and it's assigning monochromatic data that's acquired through a filter to a certain channel in your image processing. Usually you are going to process an image by having a red, green, and blue channel, and you can put any type of data into each of those channels. And for regular RGB images, you're obviously assigning red to red, green to green, and blue to blue. When you do narrowband imaging, you are taking data with different filters, typically HA, S2, and O3, and since they're not all completely in the visible spectrum, you have to assign them to certain colors. And actually, initially, it was done with the Hubble palette, and I may or may not be right that it was initially done through that, but the Hubble Space Telescope developed the Hubble palette to differentiate between those filters so that they could actually see the contrast in the data from each filter. Probably the most well-known palette is the Hubble palette, which is SHO, S2 for red, HA for green, and O3 for blue. So just to show where those are, I'm going to borrow a couple slides throughout this presentation from a previous presentation on narrowband imaging. O3 is kind of a blue-green or teal color. HA is a deep red, and S2 is a little bit even deeper red. Those are kind of just outside of the visible spectrum, kind of bordering on what's actually visible. So a lot of times when you're actually doing color mapping, you're using these three channels, and sometimes others. Sometimes people will use infrared, sometimes they'll use ultraviolet. Sometimes you'll actually mix these with red, blue, and green as well, and we'll get into that later. So going over some of the typical palettes, like I said, the Hubble palette is the most well-known, which is the SHO. And a lot of times that will make data in red-dominated images very, very red. So sometimes, or very, very green, I'm sorry. So sometimes you want to mix that palette up to give it a little more natural feel. So you might switch that to something more like an HOS or HSO, and then you can get more complex and start blending each of those channels into each other for certain percentages. And then especially when you're actually only doing bicolor images, if you've collected data with 2 filters instead of 3, you'll really want to do some blending. So a lot of times if you're doing like a bicolor image maybe of the Dumbbell Nebula, you'll do like a red HA and then a mix of red and blue, or HA and O3 for the blue or for the green, and then maybe just O3 for the blue. So again, another slide borrowed from a previous presentation. When you're actually taking these images, selecting how you're going to mix your colors, what channel you're going to assign for each of your colors, and how you want to mix your palette together, it's good to understand the target and understand how strong the emissions are, which bands are actually emitting. There's some targets that may not have any S2 in them. There's some that may have a lot of all 3 channels, like the Eastern Veil, and there's some that might have mostly just HA. And that'll help you determine how much of each channel you actually need to acquire in your data, and how strong or weak it's going to be. And you have to understand that if it's going to be very weak, that you're going to have to stretch it a lot to actually get it to blend in well. So a lot of times your O3 and your S2 is going to be quite a bit weaker. So when you go to color mapping, you're going to have to stretch them a lot so that it's not completely dominated by one channel. And so sometimes you might want to take either longer sub-exposures with the O3 and S2, or you might want to acquire more of them. You might want to bend them. You may want to do a lot of noise reduction on them. But it's just good to understand your target when you get into actually mapping these channels out. And that way you won't be surprised by what's happening during your processing. So a lot of times I'll look on Astrobin or Flickr or throughout cloudy nights. Some guys on their websites even post versions of each of their monochrome pictures, like Bill Snyder, which is really helpful in kind of planning what you want to do. He'll show what a single sub looks like for each channel, and then he'll show what the stack looks like for each channel. It's just good to understand what's there. So that's always a good way to prep yourself for actually processing these images and acquiring your data. So I'm going to spend the majority of tonight actually going through different kinds of color mapping techniques. The simplest and easiest way to do it is just do an RGB construction, and I will do that in just a minute here, where you take one of your channels and assign it to red, green, and blue. And you can do this manually on your own in Photoshop, or you can use one of several actions. Andy's Astro Actions has both an RGB or a Hubble palette creation action, and Astronomy Tools also has a construct RGB image from channel files. They'll do the same thing as if you were to manually construct the channels or construct the image, and they're really useful and really easy. Just a lot of times I'll do them right off the bat just to see what the mix is going to be. Sometimes I want to start blending different amounts of HA into O3 or HA into S2, and it's just a way to real easily kind of get a quick preview of what the image is going to look like, especially through those actions. And on a side note, I will highly recommend both those action sets. They have lots of useful tools. They also have lots of useful tools that actually can be used in color mapping as well. One thing that I'll point out before I go into this kind of basic RGB construction is that it can be a little bit limiting in fine-tuning the color controls later on when you're processing. And even initially it can be a little bit limiting. It's not the easiest way to go in and actually change the blends for each channel. Later on, you can actually get going and use selective colors or selective color saturation to tweak or change the colors. But sometimes if you go in and start messing around with the selective colors or the saturation a lot, you might actually destroy your data, both by increasing or decreasing it. So it's not my preferred method usually to construct images, but it is definitely a good way to get quick previews of what it's like. And if you are just going with a plain palette, then it's not necessarily a bad way to do it either. So I will go over into Photoshop here now, and I will do a kind of a quick construction like I was talking about of these different channels. So I'm going to open data from my Eastern Veil Nebula. And so I have my HA, my S2, and my O3. They're all aligned, and a lot of times, usually, they're also calibrated. A lot of times, I will actually go through and process these a good bit before combining them. In this image, I did not, but realistically, in an ideal universe, you would actually do tone mapping to each of these channels, which I will show you later on with my Pelican data. But if you have tone map channels, it really just makes color mapping quite a bit easier. You don't have to deal with the stars. It's easier to replace stars later on. It's easier to stretch the data a little more and get more color out of it, and also to increase the saturation. So as promised, I'll show you the manual method for doing this first. So you'll go into one of your channels, and I'll just do a Hubble palette creation to start with here. And here I have my S2 data. So in Photoshop, you would want to change the mode to RGB color. And what that'll do is it'll give you 3 channels, red, green, and blue. And that'll allow you to come in here and actually start replacing these channels. So I'm going to keep the red channel as is, since I'm doing a Hubble palette creation. So S2 would be aligned to red. The next one is going to be HA. So I would come in here and I would select my HA frame. I would copy that, and I'll go back over to my S2, or to the original S2 that I changed to an RGB image. And I will go to this green channel, and I will replace the green data in that channel there with my HA. So now I can back out to the overall image, and you can see that there's some color in here. The reason there's color is because I put a different channel in, or different data into that green channel. You can see that starting to show through here, a little bit of the green from the HA. So to complete this, I'm going to go to the blue channel, and I'm going to take my O3 data, and same thing, I'm going to copy that, and I'm going to go back to the blue channel from the original image, and I'm going to copy the O3 data into that blue channel. And voila, you have a Hubble palette creation. So as I said, this can be somewhat limiting for actually doing a lot of color tweaking, because all you have are your different channels. So if you come back to here, you have your initial layer. One thing you can do to do a little bit of tweaking here is you can come up to Image, Adjustments, and then go to Selective Color, and you can start tweaking stuff in your selective color. So maybe I want my red to show up a little bit more, so I might turn down the cyan and turn up the magenta a little bit here on the red, and then I might do the same thing again on the magenta, and you can see it starts getting a lot redder in there. Another thing that happens with the Hubble palette is that you get these very magenta looking stars. Sometimes you'll get some bluish and whitish ones and some more yellow ones, so that's something else that we'll look at later. But just to show you how the actions work and that they do the same thing, I'm going to undo all this blending that I did here, and I'm back to the original data, my 3 monochromatic images. So what I can do is come over to my actions, and I have Annie's Astro actions, and if you come into them, there's a Hubble palette creation option. So I will play that action, and it's going to ask me to open my S2 image. So I open that, and then it asks me to open my HA, I open that, and then it asks me to open my O3, and I open that. And hers gives you one nice thing here where you can actually change the colors, the levels right off the bat. So a little extra useful tool here in her action, but just another way to kind of do this in a hurry and preview different stuff. So one thing that you can also do in your manual image creation here, instead of using the actions, is you can, if you were doing a bicolor, for example, I will open the HA and the O3, and what you could do is actually blend 2 of your channels together. And the easiest way to do this, there's lots of ways to do it, but the easiest way for me to do it is to copy the data from one channel and blend it on top of the other. So I will copy my O3 on top of my HA, and I will just do this as like a 50% opacity. And then I'm just going to save that as a synthetic green channel. Okay. And what you actually want to do is flatten this too, which I did not do. If you flatten it first, it'll be a lot better for actually creating your image. So flatten that, and that will save that one more time. Here's my synthetic green. Okay. So now I'm going to use the action again to create a custom blend channel here. I'm using Yanni's Astro Actions. I do the RGB combine. So this time I want a little more natural look. So I'm going to put the HA data into the red channel. Into the green channel, I'm going to put my synthetic green. And then into the blue channel, I'm going to put my O3. And there you go. So pretty quickly, just by doing that little blend, you can get a lot different look here. And then pretty quickly, with a little bit of selective color changing, I can get my reds to pop just a little bit more and look a little bit more red. I can go into the selective colors under magenta and hike up the magenta, hike down the yellow a little bit, hike down the cyan a little bit, and you see that this color is starting to get a little bit more natural, kind of with this red and blue look, sort of like the Eastern Veil would look naturally. And to take it a step further, another blend that people will do with color mapping, and again, this is why I like Yanni's Astro Actions for this, it's very quick, is that they'll go in and they'll actually just do HA for red, and then O3 for your green, and O3 for your blue. And then it'll give it even more red and blue look. A little bit of teal on the outside here. So it's a very quick method for kind of hopping back and forth and seeing what the different palettes will look like, and kind of testing different things out until you find something you're happy with. So that is the manual and action method for going in and creating these different color mapped images. So I can stop here real quick and see if there's any questions before I move on.
Sean is mentioning it. Yanni's action came out more green. I was wondering whether you knew what was behind that.
I don't. It's possible that I just picked the wrong data for it. I can try that again real quick and see. And if it did, then I'm curious too, because I actually haven't used hers for creating the Hubble palette before. There we go. So I think that looks more like the original, if I'm right. So I probably just picked the wrong channel whenever I did it.
Yeah.
Yeah, because she does the same thing. She just goes through and creates a show image, SHO, same way as the RGB. So yeah, I probably just picked the wrong channel when I went through and did that. So going back into the PowerPoint, I will go on to the next method, and it's clipping masks. I know that Ken Crawford has done several tutorials on these, and Steve Canistro has as well. I've learned all of the clipping mask stuff that I did through Bill Snyder's technique, and he has a tutorial on his website for bicolor processing, where he creates two channels and then actually creates a synthetic third channel for his color mapping. I like this one quite a bit more because it allows a lot more control over colors while you're actually blending them. And if you're using, lower opacity layers after actually blending your data together, you can go back near the end of your processing and actually change the color by just using those clipping masks from the beginning of your processing, but later on during your processing, and it will show through. And it's also really easy to add curves and levels and saturations and all kinds of adjustments into those. So I will go through and do a quick step through on how to do that. probably actually take a little more time on this one because I think it's so powerful and useful to use. So what I'm going to do is open those 3 channels, but I'm also going to open the one where I already went through and did all of this as well. So before I step through and show you all that, I will show you what the actual channels or the actual layers look like in Photoshop. And I'll see if I can make this a little bit bigger so that you can see. Is that coming through clear, Adam? The different layers on my Photoshop?
Yes, they are.
Okay. Okay, so as I was talking about, I like this one a lot more because once you actually create your image, it's easy to go through with curves and opacities and change the kind of blend quite a bit. And so you can see all I did was click on my curves here, and I'm just pulling this curve around a little bit up and down, and you can see the image changing pretty dramatically and really quite easily just by grabbing one of my channels and the curve button and moving that around. So I can kind of give it a more red feel or more green feel. I can go into one of my other channels and do the same thing and give it a little more purple and then a little more green again. So again, I really think this method is very powerful. So I will go back to doing the same old Hubble palette and just doing it another method. And so for this one, I am going to go to my original image, which is the S2. And I'm going to change this to an RGB image. So I'll go to Image Mode and RGB, which you need to do if it's monochromatic data, and I'll unlock my first layer and turn that. And I unlock that by clicking the lock button. You can also just change the name of the layer, and it'll unlock it, so it's not a background layer. And then I'm going to change that to a screen blending mode. The next thing I'm going to do is come up to my layer and do a new adjustment layer, and then I will do a hue and saturation adjustment layer. When you click on that, it's going to give you the option here to use previous layer to create clipping mask, which I do want to do in this case. So I'll hit OK. And once that is done, if you can see here, I have my tab for the hue saturation layer that's going to give me several different options in here. One of them is preset default, which I'm going to keep as is. But another one that you'll see down here is the colorize box, and I do want to colorize it. So I'm going to click on the colorize box, and then if you come up here to the hue, you can see you can actually pick exactly what color is going to go in there. So instead of assigning red, green, and blue through your channels, you're using hue and saturation layers with clipping masks to assign your colors. So for red, you can either go all the way up to 360 or you can go all the way down to 0. Both of those are red. And then you want to increase the saturation, and I think that those guys usually increase it all the way to 100. I've actually found I like it being just a little bit less, maybe somewhere around 75, but I'll just do it at 100 now for you to see. And then decrease the lightness, and this is kind of something you can experiment with for personal preference and see what you like once you start going in here and mixing stuff. But somewhere around -50, -40, -20, somewhere in there is what a lot of the guys use for their lightness on these. So the other thing you can do to adjust the intensity of this red channel is add a another layer in the adjustment layer. This time will be a curves layer, and I'm going to use the previous layer to create a clipping mask again. And once you do that, if you come to the curves layer and click on those curves, you can see you can actually play with that curve and adjust pretty much everything in there. You can do the same thing and create a levels adjustment layer, or whatever you want to do. So for now, I'm just going to keep this as is, and I'm going to add the next channel. Since we're doing Hubble palette, I will add the HA channel. So I'm going to turn this one into RGB, and I'm going to copy it and bring it over to my original image, and I'm going to paste it on. Again, you want to create this as a screen node. And then the steps are pretty much the same. You come in, do layer, new adjustment layer, and you want to do hue and saturation. You'll use a previous layer to create a clipping mask and colorize it. And so the value for green on this one is 120. And you want to colorize it. You also want to increase the saturation and decrease the lightness.
Josh, by the way, you don't have to convert that to RGB. When you paste it onto the other, it will automatically convert.
Yeah, that's correct. Yep. Sorry. Thank you for pointing that out. If it's, and I'll show you that with the 03 channel when I go in and do that. You can just bring it over, just copy it, even though it's monochromatic data, and bring it over. And so we now have our green channel on, which is the HA. And like I said, for this one, you want to do 120. Again, increase the saturation. You can play with how much you bring that lightness up and down to personal taste. And as always, I highly recommend kind of experimenting to see what you like. I'll just bring that one to -50 also. And then here we'll go to the 03 data, and we'll do the same thing again, and bring that back over to the original image. And I forgot to add a curves layer here, and I want to do that. So I'm going to do a new adjustment layer and throw in the curves there. And then up to the final channel, the 03, we'll do the same thing again and put that in screen mode, do a new adjustment layer, and again, the hue saturation, and increase the saturation again, colorize it, and this time you want to go up to 240. And that'll give you your blue data. So this is another way, just to create a Hubble palette image. And as you can see, it came out pretty much the same as the other ones. Some of the channels might be a little bit later than the previous ones, but it came out pretty much the same as the other ways that I showed you how to create the Hubble palette image. So what I'm going to do now is come in and put this last curves layer on and use the previous layer as a clipping mask, and there we go. So this one, like I said, I think is the most powerful. I think it gives you a lot more control over adjusting each of the levels and the intensity of each of the levels, and kind of just, you can bring this black point in and out. You can change so much more, and it gives you a lot more control later on. And then something you can do if you are a person who uses a lot of low opacity layers or screen layers is you can drag all of this into a group and just have your entire kind of color mapping package here in one little group at the very beginning of your image, and it's really useful. It's really useful for being organized and then for going back and changing stuff later on in your processing techniques. Another thing you can go in and do if you're not happy with kind of the intensities, you can come in and actually change the opacity on some of these layers. Maybe you're using an image that's too dominated by the green and you're not happy with how dominated it is by the green. You can turn the opacity down on that, and you see if you turn it way down, you almost have what was the bicolor image like before, where you get the red and blue. You turn it back up, and maybe your data isn't great on your 03 and you want to turn that down and get most of the green image. So just a lot you can do with this method. And then sometimes maybe I'll even just play around in this for an hour or two and find a palette that really, really makes me happy, and then I'll just flatten the entire image and say, okay, well, this is what I'm gonna start playing with. So I really wanted to cover that technique pretty thoroughly, and I can pause now and see if there's any questions before I move on and talk about some other things that I'd like to tonight. Adam,
hey Josh, I have a question.
Yes.
So when you're blending all of these together in either mode, are you checking your background levels to sample and see if you have equal red, green, and blue values?
Sometimes, it depends on what I'm doing. Usually, I will do that as the next step, but it is one thing that you can do. You can do it while you're blending them together. A lot of times, though, when I process each of my individual channels, I will process them myself. I always process to the same value for my background, so I know that the background's going to be pretty even. For final presentation of an image, I always leave my background at 35. And then and that's for color, and if I'm doing a mono image and done processing it, even if I'm tone mapping or whatever I'm doing, I always leave it at 25. It's just kind of where I've ended up as a personal preference. So I usually know that the backgrounds are going to be pretty well matched up. But it's a good point to bring up, because you'll tend to get some really funky color casts if you don't do that, or you might get these really red background, or really blue, or really green, and so you can go in and change those a number of ways once you have this color put together. I'm sorry, your color mapping put together. One of the easier ways right off the bat is just to go into create a new levels layer, and once you have that levels layer, to come in and pick a new, use your middle dropper to make a grade point. Another thing that you can do, kind of as Sean was saying, is you can look through each of your channels and make sure that you're lined up pretty well. As you can see, after I switch this here, my blue channel is a lot further over, so I might bring in my red channel a little bit, and I bring in my green channel just a little bit as well, and kind of neutralize the background. You can do it in Pix Insight. You can do it, whatever your preferred method is. But as I said, I think the easiest way to deal with it is just to have them have matching backgrounds right off the bat, and then you know that they're going to come out with a pretty well equalized background. So I can come back and spend a little more time kind of messing around with some of this stuff. Sean, did that answer your question before I move on?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, man.
Yep. Okay. So I will come back and play around a little bit more with those later on if we have time, but I want to make sure I get to everything. So I'm going to close those out. And as you saw, it's interesting, like I said, there's an infinite number of ways to create these images. And as you saw, a lot of them come out pretty much looking exactly the same with all those different methods. And depending on what you're doing with your image, or what point you are in the processing with it, might affect what method you're going to use. So I'm going to move on in the PowerPoint here and talk a little bit about replacing narrowband stars and actually combining the one-shot color, or RGB, and narrowband data. And again, this was borrowed from a previous PowerPoint. We've kind of done several sessions now on narrowband imaging, kind of working up to what will be one entire processing session all the way through for narrowband targets. So you can use the one-shot color or RGB data to add to the narrowband for kind of a nice final blend that includes all 6 channels and maybe even a 7th channel luminance, or maybe a synthetic luminance channel. A lot of times I won't use the RGB for anything but the stars. and that's also very powerful, especially if you're doing more natural looking images like I did with the Eastern Veil, where it's more red and blue and you want it to look pretty natural, but you no matter how hard you try, you're not going to get good looking natural stars from narrowband data, so you need those RGB stars, and a lot of times I'll just spend 90 minutes or so capturing those to throw in at the end. And then sometimes you'll just have a plain RGB image and blend the HA into it. And there's a bunch of different ways you can do that. You can go in and blend your HA just into the red, or create a luminance with your HA, or blend it into the different channels. And I'll show you that in just a little bit here. But first I want to go back to the RGB stars. As you can see, it's pretty easy to actually grab the RGB stars and throw them onto a narrowband image, and you can throw it onto a mono narrowband image, as I've done here with the Eastern Veil, just to give it a different and interesting look. You don't need a ton of data, and you don't need hours and hours and hours of data. Sometimes all of my RGB data is as long as just one of my narrowband subs, and that's because the stars are typically very bright and easy to bring into your image, and a lot of times you don't have to be too concerned with the background noise. And on top of it, it's usually going to be lower anyways, since you're not stretching it quite as far to bring out the faint nebulosity. So, as I said, the easiest way to do this, all of this color mapping, is to do tone mapping. And we've covered that before, but just real briefly, I'll touch on it again. And tone mapping is removing stars from the monochrome data before processing it. It'll allow you to stretch your data quite a bit further. It won't introduce nearly as many issues with your stars, like halos, or maybe even will help you get rid of kind of oblong stars. Right now we're working on a collaboration project in Cloudy Nights, and the stars don't match up well at all in any of the images. Although the nebulosity looks great together, the stars don't. So I'm finding, before moving on in that I'm going to have to remove all the stars, because otherwise I'm getting weird kind of Russian doll stacked stars, and it doesn't look good at all. So it'll also help you actually combine images from different acquisition sessions, or different scopes, or different scales. It'll also let you reveal much fainter dust without blowing those stars out. And then finally, it'll give you quite a few different options on how you do your final presentation, and especially as tonight with color mapping. And just for a quick example of what going through in tone mapping does, the upper left here, you'll see kind of the first look at the data, where only the bright stars are shown, and then partway through the processing you bring out some of the nebulosity, and then you can remove the stars, and then you can do some final imaging processing down on the bottom right to really get a pretty striking image. And when you combine data like this, it's really fun and easy to play with the colors, and then you can lay your stars back on later, and it is much easier to do than if you're trying to overlay stars on data that already has them in there. So you might not always have time or the desire, or maybe it's difficult to remove the stars and do tone mapping. It takes a lot of practice to really get it great, but really it's the ultimate way to do it. I also mentioned there's a couple actions out there, and I've used them. I think that they work quite well, although I don't think anything works as well as manually removing the stars. JP Mestavino was kind of the original tone mapping guy. I think he has an action in Photoshop now, quite a few tutorials on his site. On the Astro Imaging channel, we created a webinar and tutorial video that showed actually this picture right here and how to get rid of the stars in it. And there's also a software called Stratton, which I just started trying out recently, and it does a really impressive job at removing the stars, and probably even a good enough job if you're removing stars during tone mapping for color mapping. And part of the reason I say that is that when you're color mapping, your data doesn't have to be quite as sharp because you're putting it into the colors. when you want to put a luminance layer on for all the sharpness and clarity, then it has to be quite sharp, but you don't necessarily need tone mapped data for that. So I would recommend looking at that Stratton or JP's action, and also the tutorials, so you know how to do it on your own if you really kind of want these high quality finished starless images. So before I go in and show you kind of how I do this combination, here's another example kind of the Dumbbell Nebula, where I did a combination of one-shot color and RGB stars and narrowband, and bicolor color mapping to get this kind of look. And another example here will be M52 and NGC 7635, I believe. And again, just another way to do kind of color mapping is to bring in HA data and just kind of blend it into some of your other data. So I will, I'm going to go over and do that now real quickly. And see that I'm running a little low on time, but I just kind of want to show you how I do that. So I'm going to do this with the Pelican Nebula data that I have. So I'll go into the Pelican here and grab these. I'm going to open my red, green, blue, and HA data. And so the Pelican is interesting because it's so bright that there is a lot of data in the red channel for your red, green, blue. There's still not very much in the green and blue channel. You can see these channels are really quite dark for the Pelican. And these were actually separated after doing some stretching, so there's even less data in the green and blue channels than this is showing. But what I did want to show is the power of using tone-mapped narrowband data for doing your color mapping. And the reason it's so powerful is that you don't have to deal with the stars. So as you can see, I have my tone-mapped Pelican Nebula data here. And I can copy this, and I can bring it on top of each of my channels here and blend it into each of these channels to get a really powerful effect. So I'm going to blend it on to my HA, or blend my HA onto my red channel. And so if I'm doing a HA RGB, a lot of times I like to be pretty heavy on the red channel. And I'll do something like 75% HA over the red. And I will actually use a lighten mode, so that way I'm not destroying the stars. So I still have pretty much the same data in here for the RGB stars, but I have much better data in here for the actual Pelican Nebula. You can see it just pops, and there's a lot more sharp, crisp details. So I'm going to flatten this and save it as a red blend. I'll save that as copy. And then I'm going to go in and do the same things with my green and blue channel. With my green channel, bring that down usually to around 15%, 15 to 20. I'll do 15 for this one. And again, we'll just do lighten. And you can see, kind of pops the nebula out. So what this does is it just helps kind of balance out the colors a little bit on these real HA heavy targets. And I'm going to flatten this image. Save this as my green blend. Okay. And then I'm going to do the same thing with my blue. And for the blue, I like the opacity to be a little higher, so usually I'll do about maybe 35% on this one. So, you know, play around as with everything else, and find what you like for your blend, and you know what your data will support. But like I said, usually I like to live somewhere in the 75, 15, 35 range. So I'll go in here and do a blue blend and save that as it is flattened. Okay. And then I will close that out my red. And then actually will just use my HA as a loom. So I can go in here, and the quickest way again is going to be Amy's Astro Actions. And usually the way that I'll do it is I'll just do RGB. I don't like the way the LRGB works because I think it washes out the colors a little bit. But so I'll do an RGB, and I will use my red blend for the red, green blend for the green, obviously, and then the blue for the blue. And it gives a nice pop there. You can see the star colors are off just a little bit here, so usually the first thing I'll do as soon as I run that, or do this, is I'll run an HLBG, Hasta La Vista for the green, and it gets rid of the green color cast of the stars and brings them back to being kind of blue and yellow. And then the next thing I'll do before I go too far is I'll actually change the mode to lab color. I'll go into my lightness channel here, and I will open up my loom in HA. And I will actually paste that into my lightness channel. Did I miss something up here? Oh, yeah, that's right. Sorry, wrong step here. And so once I have that pasted into my lightness channel, that is going to mess up the stars a little bit, and you'll see why I'm doing that. Just a minute here. So I'm going to copy that as is, and there's a couple ways to go through and do this, but just to do it quickly on here, I'm going to go back to my history and go back to right before I did that, and I'm going to paste this on. And I'm going to paste it on as a lightness, or lighten, and so it'll give just a little bit nicer, sharper look to the image. And again, the stars still aren't fixed in here, and I will actually show you how to go through and put those back to where you want them to be as well. But I just wanted to show you kind of how you can blend this in here for the color mapping, which is the big thing. And so I'm going to go back to lab color one more time here and show you in this color mapping another way to adjust them besides saturation and selective colors is to go into your channels in lab mode and actually adjust the brightness and contrast of the channels in lab mode. And so you can bring the red up a little bit by increasing the contrast on the A channel. And then you can go into your D channel and you can change the brightness and contrast of that. And so if you want to bring that contrast up, you kind of bring out that blues a little bit more here, and it gives kind of a nice, more pleasing pink / blue color to it. And so that's one way to, or yet another way to kind of come in here and play around with the actual colors in data. So I'm going to stop there, make sure I have time to actually show how to replace the stars in an image, and see if there's any questions before I go on to replacing the stars. Adam, any questions?
There aren't any questions. Eric suggested JP's process, or make your own action using JP's process. And he says you do have to do it for different sizes, image scales, or different sized images. And Frank thinks you missed lightening the blue channel, and that's why you had the issue.
Okay.
I didn't see if you resolved that.
I actually closed it out. I might have missed brightening that. And I will comment on Eric's. I have copied those actions and done them, and I commented on it before when I did the tutorial before. I think that the way that you process starless images really probably, in my opinion, depends on whether or not you're presenting your starless image as a final image or if you're just using it to combine channels for a color mapped image in the end. I think that if you want to do a mono starless image and present it as kind of a really nice sharp detailed image, I consider it a lot more effective to do kind of a very iterative technique, and kind of remove them and then process the data a little more, and then go back and heal them a little bit and darken, use the healing tool and darken layer, and I think to really have a super sharp starless image that looks great at the end. My personal opinion is I don't think it can all be done in one action. Although I do like those actions a lot. They make it a lot easier, and they save you hours and hours of processing. But again, I guess it all depends on what you're looking for and how picky you are for your final image. I think usually if you want, like I said, a real sharp last image, I think that a more manual technique works better, in my opinion. So I want to go on and actually do this, replacing the narrowband stars here, and I'm going to use the veil data to do that, and I will come in here and show you how I'm going to do that. I won't go back to the PowerPoint to show you that because I want to make sure I get through this before 10:30. So what I'm going to do is just go back to this Hubble palette creation here. And the most powerful method that I found for replacing the narrowband stars is Bob Frank's method. And I will say that with the caveat that I think that the most powerful method is just to tone map each of your channels, your narrowband channels, and color map them together and get what you want out of the nebula, and then just bring in your RGB stars to lighten the image. That's a very easy way to do it. You don't have to worry about what's happening with your stars at all. But a lot of times it's hard to tone map it just right, or you don't want to spend the time to do it, or for whatever reason you don't do it. There's a pretty powerful method that Bob Frank created to do that. And another thing you can do too is actually just use a lighten layer with your RGB data. But again, this is art, and so it all has to do with how picky you are about what your final image looks like and what you want to see out of it. So what I have here in this image is our show data, and I'm going to open the one-shot color, or no, this was RGB data, sorry, not one-shot color, and I'm going to show this to you. So this was, I think this was 90 minutes or so worth of RGB stars. As you can see, it's a pretty dark field, and they were really short sub-exposures. I think they might have been 3 minutes each, and they were from a red zone, so you can see maybe really tiny hints of the Veil Nebula poking out here, but really not much at all. But what you do have is a pretty good clean star field. I already calibrated this image and did my color balancing on the stars. So these stars, pretty accurate color representation. And sometimes, I'll really stretch this data pretty harder than I normally would, just to make these stars a little bit brighter, so that they really stand out. So, like I said, the first and easiest way to do this would just be to paste your sky on, or your starry sky, label it starry sky, paste that onto your Hubble palette data, and you would do a lighten mode for that. So that works okay, and you can even come in here and you can see that some of these stars got a little bit, went from the magenta to the new color, and they look okay, but you can still see there's a lot of kind of purple and violet stars in here still, and that's not what I want to end up with. This would be a nice step in the right direction. You can even play a little bit with the RGB data in the lighten mode and really stretch it a lot to bring out those stars, and you might bring those levels way up and then clip the black point just a little bit so you're not bringing your new background sky in. You might stretch a little bit more here, and that'll give you your colors in there pretty nice. So it's an okay start to do it that way, but it's not the cleanest and best method to do it. So I'm going to delete that layer. Yes. And so the Bob Frank method takes your Hubble palette data, and the first step that you want to do is turn all of your stars white. If you turn your stars white, then you can decrease the lightness on them, and then it's much easier to bring your stars in, your RGB stars, and replace all of them. So to turn your stars white, you'll come up. I created a new layer here. Just copied it all, and then pasted it on top. So you'll go to Filter, go to Noise, and then go to Reduce Noise. So it gives you a lot of options here in your Reduce Noise. The first one is this Strength option, and I don't want that on at all. So I'll turn that all the way down to 0, and what you see happens is if you turn that Strength down, then it also turns off the Preserve Details slider. And that's because you're not actually doing anything but reducing your color noise, which you see I want to bring all the way up to 100%. And the reason this works so well from Bob's site and from what I've seen is that it typically does a really good job of identifying only stars as color noise. And as you'll see, it's not perfect, and I will show you why it's not perfect right here. You can see that it actually notices some of the Veil Nebula here as being color noise, and it takes the color out of some of these filaments in the Veil Nebula. And there's a couple different ways to deal with that, and I'll show you that in just a minute. But anyways, so the settings you want to make your stars white are reduce color noise all the way to 100%, strength down to 0, and sharpen details down to 0%. And I'm going to click OK, and it takes just a minute to do this. And so if I zoom in, I can show you just by clicking on and off, they go from pretty magenta to pretty white right off the bat. And you might want to run this a couple times, and I am going to actually run this a couple times. Shortcut to redo that same action again is just to hit Control F. It'll do the same thing again. And ideally, you want to take all of the color out of your stars and have them be just white. And the reason is that we're going to go in with a selective color and actually change all of the white data in our image and darken it. And so you might want to run this 3, 4, 5 times. And that way you actually grab these faintest stars that were magenta, which usually are the most challenging stars to replace with RGB, and make them white too. And if you don't do it enough times, what will tend to happen is that you will put in your RGB stars, and a lot of your brighter stars will be coming through great. You'll get really nice RGB color stars for the bigger ones, but for the fainter ones, they'll remain magenta, or or you'll get like some kind of weird blend, and it stands out a lot to your eye. It's weird. If there's just little small issues in the image, it stands out a lot to your eye. So you want to make sure you get even all these small, really faint white stars to be as white as possible. So as you can see, the unfortunate side effect was that it actually changed the nebula to a little bit whiter as well. All these blue filament strands went over to white, which is no good, but we'll deal with that again in a minute. So you have all these stars as white. The next thing you want to go is to Image, Adjustments, and Selective Color. And under Selective Color, there is a white for colors. And you want to bring your slider on your black point all the way over to the right. You may not have to bring it all the way over, but usually I do bring it all the way over to the right. And this darkens all of your white stars. So if I zoom in here, you can see all these white stars, or all the white stars that have kind of holes in the middle because it was really darkened, and they're much, much fainter. And the reason you want to do this is because when you bring in your one-shot color data or your RGB data, turn this one off, paste this guy over it, is it does really good job of filling in color on those stars. And this wants to be on lighten mode as well. So as you can see, gives you a nice color in the stars, and then it doesn't touch the rest of your nebula. And as Sean pointed out earlier, one thing you want to watch is your background sky level, and make sure that you're not actually clipping out your original sky, or maybe you want to if your sky is better. So you have to take a look at what your background sky level is and make sure that you're getting what you want out of your lighten mode. So usually what I'll do is I'll stretch the midpoint slider a little bit to give the color stars a little more color in them, and then I'll bring the black point slider in just enough that I'm not replacing the background sky. And then I'll actually come in on the same level here and increase the saturation just a little bit more, so I'm getting more color out of my RGB stars. So this is great. Now the stars look really nice. They're replaced. There's no magenta stars in here, as you can see, just the RGB stars. The one thing that did do, though, was destroy these kind of filament strands in the Eastern Veil Nebula. So there's two ways to do this. Or there's probably even more. These are the two ways that I like the most. One is that I will come back in here to this layer where I actually whited out all of these stars. I will actually use my star layer, the RGB star layer, and have only that showing. And I'm going to copy that. And I will come back into this layer here where I whitened out my narrowband stars, and I'm going to create a mask. And my mask is only going to let the stars show through. So when I put that mask on there, I want to clip the black points, so I'm not touching anything else. Then I want to stretch the stars, all the faint stars up, to make sure that those are actually coming through. So I'll come in and actually clip it a good bit, stretch the midpoint just to, up enough that the faint stars are showing through. And then I will also even come up and do an adjustment on the contrast and the brightness. I'll turn the contrast way up, and then I will turn the brightness up a good bit too. And what this will do is it'll help even clip the black points a little further and then whiten the stars out just a little bit more. And so what this did is it actually stopped, hopefully, from whiting out those stars from actually getting rid of all this blue data. And as you can see, it did a pretty good job, but it actually also covered enough of these magenta stars up that I didn't actually get them all white. So you have to play with this mask a good bit to find the right happy medium to get your stars to the point where they're white, but you're not actually ruining your nebula over here. So that method is one way to do it, and I don't like that one quite as much. And the other method that I like is to come back to the original image and copy that, and then get my nice RGB stars on there, and I will actually copy or paste the original data back on top. But this time I'm only going to use lighten mode. And as you can see, it went back in here and it actually replaced those blue strands on top. And it did not actually bring the magenta stars back in too much. And you can play with the levels just a little bit here and there just to make sure it doesn't bring them in. And the reason is because I brightened those stars up just enough that it's not going to come up on top of those. So this is the best method to kind of go back and put RGB stars into narrowband data that already has narrowband stars in it. As I mentioned, I think the best way I think to do it is to actually use tone map data for your color mapping and then you can just lay your RGB stars on top with the lighten mode. But this is a good way to do it if you have the narrowband stars on there. So I'm going to pause once again. I think we're about out of time here, but see if there's any questions on this method before finishing up here.
I haven't seen any questions in here. There's one comment I just want to address from Frank out on the Google Plus page. He's asking if these are documented anywhere, and they're kind of documented here. These are all recorded to YouTube, so you can go back and click through and find out where they are. And Josh kind of gave credit to a few of the people who, I'll say, kind of devised some of these methods, whether it's JP Metziviano or I forget.
Steve Canestra and Bob Frank and Bill Snyder. Yeah.
Yes, and each of them have shared their resources on their website, so you can check them out as well.
And Ken Crawford too. I want to make sure.
Ken Crawford.
Yeah, with the color mapping. Yeah. So we have a couple of videos on here, and if anyone wants the PowerPoint, I'm happy to share the PowerPoint as well. So.
Yep.
I think that pretty much covers everything that I wanted to go through tonight. It's kind of quick and dirty and all that. So, any other questions or anybody at any time wants to ask more questions in more detail on that stuff, we're happy to go through and address more of it or more of the techniques. Again, it's hard in an hour to kind of cover all the eventualities on these processing techniques, and what you can do in an hour is kind of give a nice head start for somebody, and then really the best way is to play around and experiment with these techniques on your own and learn what works best. And a lot of things, as Sean mentioned, there's a lot of things about layers and opacities and masks that you just have to kind of fine-tune yourself, and you can take as much or as little time as you want. The more time you take, the better your masks are. The better your blending techniques are, the better your final images are going to turn out. It's a little bit hard maybe in a live presentation like this to really go in depth on maybe how to create that mask to allow the nebula to show through, or to block the nebula to allow all the stars to show through. But there's lots of ways to do each one of those things. So this is hopefully just a good springboard for everybody to kind of get going on all this. But, and with that, I'll wrap this up and call it a night on this presentation.
Thanks, Josh. I want to remind the YouTube viewers that if you guys have questions, you can type them into the Q&A or in the comments. Q&A is probably your best spot to do it, and we'll just get right to them. My own comment is, first of all, thanks for the presentation. It was really good. Stars go a long way for an image, and narrowband stars can look pretty ugly. And I've said this before, but when I bought my narrowband, or when I bought my camera, my CCD, and I knew I was going towards narrowband, I thought, oh, it'll be nice to be able to ignore the stars. But I think by paying attention to the stars, we're kind of pushing it to new levels, because it is about making the pictures just look a little bit better. And Josh, you mentioned the 3D view, and I think stars go a long way for that. If not so much that they give you that 3D view, although the kind of size of them and brightness of them does, but if they don't look realistic, then they detract from the entire image.
I think that's one of the real main things for people who are really trying to push their images, is that we spend a lot of time talking about what you can do to make it look better, and things to make it stand out and look awesome. And I think that that's all great, but the one thing that you can't do for sure is have anything that doesn't look right or look in place, because there's something that looks awkward or off, or colors seem off or not natural, or stars are bloated or have giant halos around them, then no matter how good the rest of your picture looks, the eyes continually go right to that part of the image first. So yeah, I think if your goal is really to make the best looking images possible, then you have to pay attention to all those small details, like replacing your stars, and like making sure when you're replacing your stars, you're replacing all of them, not just the bright ones. With this Eastern Veil, I think it took me 10 revisions to figure out how to replace the stars inside of the nebula correctly, and it made a big difference. I mean, people even pointed it out. They were like, "Man, that picture is really, really cool, and it looks great, but you can see inside of the nebula, the stars look just a little bit different than they do outside of the nebula," and that was because you had a really challenging time, getting all of the stars' colors to be replaced, and I think that was. Just kind of like you said, another point that goes to how important all of that is. And I'll open up this image and show you that this was the final Eastern Veil blend when I got everything together. But I thought it made a real big difference being able to put color stars in there instead of just having like a field of magenta stars. And then, as you said, even more so that all the stars look like that.
And I know what you're saying about the stars in front of the nebula, because that's always a struggle.
Right.
Hey, Josh, have you played with the scripts in PI on this yet? I
have not. I have just gotten going. Well, I have on the color mapping and the pixel math some. I've had PI for a little while, but I just started playing with it this week, and I didn't think that we could use both programs and do them both justice. But,
no, I understand it.
but it seemed very powerful.
Yeah, you're going with the traditional, and which is exactly what I learned when I first started. PI has a script called Show AIP. That if you haven't seen a demonstration of it yet, I helped Warren Keller do a tutorial on it. Playing around with it, but once you start playing with that and see the power of it, those dang Europeans have come up with some pretty amazing techniques.
It's Show AIP?
Yep.
Cool. I'll have to check that out for sure. Is that for color mapping or for the replacing the stars?
For a combination of all 6 channels.
Oh, okay. Very cool.
You use sliders, and you can preview everything as you press the sliders. You press one button, and then make an adjustment on the slider. Press a button again, and until you get what you want. But as far as combination of stars into the field, and actually some of the natural RGB, it can do. I was amazed the first time I ran it and saw what it did to the magenta stars. But it takes a little work trying to figure out how to use it, but once you do it, it does a pretty darn good job.
That's what I'm finding about a lot of stuff in PI is that if you, well, a long ways away from it, but what it can do is if you figure out how to use it right, then you can take a lot of really hard and work with a lot of steps in Photoshop and turn it into a couple smaller steps in PI and have it be very powerful.
Not quite that easy, but you'll never get Photoshop totally out of my hands. But it was a hard adjustment to make it in the beginning. I will admit, and even though as much as I've learned about PI, I still go back to finish in Photoshop.
I think that's a common theme that we were talking about this week. I don't think the best thing to do is replace anything. I think the best thing to do is use the best of every program.
More tools in the bag.
Exactly.
And that almost seems like the PixInsight concept is just a bunch of tools. So to not have Photoshop on the side.
Well, they want to eliminate Photoshop. There's no doubt about that. And in Warren's last series, he was not allowed to use Photoshop in any way in any of the tutorials. He had to strictly go from start to finish in PI because they are very, very big on wanting to get away from Photoshop altogether. I don't think, personally, from my experience, that PI is the UI is strong enough yet that the average user can do that. The demonstration that Josh gave was great and showed very simplistic ways of doing this. Although it may have seemed complicated at first, but it's really not. To do the same thing in PI, if you don't know what you're doing, can be a lot more complicated.
Yeah, the one thing I haven't grasped at all in PI and haven't been shown yet is the ability to fine-tune masks like I can in Photoshop.
We had a great demo on that with mask in who gave that? Our Canadian friend. Itham gave a great demonstration on how to refine star mask and how to put multiple masks on. I will tell you, Ken Crawford and I talk about this all the time because he's just starting with PI as well, and he's kind of gotten into some of it, and then some of it, because he's such a Photoshop expert, he just has to go right back. And I show him, well, I can make a star mask in PI in 2 seconds, but I can't figure out how the hell to do it in Photoshop.
Yeah, it's funny. I don't know. I think maybe you get comfortable. Yeah, you get comfortable with what you learn. I just upgraded to the new Photoshop. I've been using CS2 my entire Astro career until maybe 3 weeks ago. And the one specific reason I got the new Photoshop was because of those masks that Ken Crawford shows with the selecting the model's hairs and stuff like that.
Oh yeah, where you can refine those masks so well. And by the way, Adam, I'm going up to. He's going to help me with my OTA Thursday. If you didn't read my message.
Yep.
But he promises. He keeps promising to go one-on-one with me and teach me how to do a mask correctly in Photoshop, because as he always says, Photoshop lives in mask.
Yeah, maybe we can have another follow-up on that. We did a masks session almost at the very beginning of our channel, months and months ago. Maybe it was like 6 months ago, but I think there's a lot more we can show on it now too.
Yeah, I sure don't totally understand them in Photoshop.
Yeah, I think PixInsight, I use Pixel Math for a lot of that stuff. But if you don't, it's all trial and error. And I'm running Pixel Math with this blend, I spit it out, I use an STF, I see what it looks like, do it again, do it again, do it again, do it over and over again. It does it really well, but I think the visualization Photoshop gives you is just excellent.
You've got to learn how to use Show AIP.
I pulled it up. I'm going to have to take a look at it.
It's a very well undocumented script, and it's at first very confusing, but once you start playing with it and start being able to see how quickly you can change blends and how well it takes care of stars and things like that, then you get hooked on it, I have to admit. And especially for making synthetic luminance, if you want to take your one of the great things about the script is I can take like an HA channel and blend it with the luminance and in the typical Photoshop methods, but I can play around with how I want to blend it to see so I don't destroy the color in the Photoshop image.
Oh yeah.
Or making a synthetic luminance out of combining HA, the O3 and the S2 all combined together.
Is this a new script, fairly new, like within the last 6 months or something?
No, it's been out for about 1.5 years, but like I said, it's not talked about. There's very little documentation on it. And Warren and I learned the most about it because it's all the original stuff's written in French. And so like it refers to green as V. But we did a lot of experimentation with it and trying different methods to see what worked best before we came up with the tutorial for it, and played around with it. So I've kind of gotten a little hooked on it, but it doesn't always do the best. But for a basic narrow band combination, I don't think I found anything better, and it will equalize your backgrounds for you.
That's something that PI does way better than Photoshop, it seems like.
I don't know if you guys can see it on my screen. Oh, you can't see it on my screen, can you? Same issue we were having before. Yeah, I have SHOAIP pulled up, but
we can see it.
Oh, you can see it?
Yeah, we can see it now.
Okay, there you go. Yeah.
All right, so all you're going to do is identify all of your different images in it. I'll give you a 30
Yeah,
second tutorial.
I don't have
You
anything readily
have to
available.
have, but you just identify your luminous channel, your S2, your HAO3. There, R is red, V is green, and B is blue.
Let's see if I can pull anything up really quick. It doesn't have to be nonlinear, right? It's all linear?
You can do it all in linear, although I've found it's better to apply a stretch or to make it nonlinear every image first. But you don't have to. You could do it all in nonlinear.
I don't know. What do I do? Click OK?
Oh, I got to see your screen. Let's see. You assign your data, okay? All right, and then you're going to go to, all right, click your background auto equalize, auto STF. All right, and now to mix the show, you're going to go down to expand that, or you can put your percentages right there. And this is what I talk about in the ability to change your blend percentages on the fly and see what it's going to look like. Your next step would be to go to mixing show in RVB. Open that up. Go up. So right now it's set up for standard Hubble. So no, go up to where it says mixing.
Yeah.
Mixing L show LRVP. Okay. And
yeah.
you don't need to change anything there, and just hit mixing show right there. Click that.
Hold on, I'm running something.
Oh wow, look at that.
Okay. There's your standard show image. Now you have to hit new picture, and it will save that in a linear form. New picture above.
Yeah, it's still working or something.
But
There we go.
You can use this to make bicolor. You can use it to make.
Oh wow.
Now, if you don't hit new picture, it will overwrite what you just did.
Okay.
If you hit new picture, it'll save that, and then you can play with your percentages of what you want from each one. And once again, click Mixing Show RVP.
Okay.
Oh, this is great.
So what happens if, this is Eric, what happens if you don't have some of these images? You only have SH, you only have a narrow band, maybe you have luminescence and RGB.
Well, you wouldn't use this to combine an LRGB image. This is only for narrowband.
Okay, so you have narrow band and you have RGB, but you don't have luminescence.
You don't need it. You can make a synthetic luminance. So let's go up above to mixing luminance.
Oh, I see, right.
And I can make a synthetic luminance, which is the way Crawford always says you should do a narrowband.
So you just mix the three?
I can combine all three of my channels of narrowband, or even two of them, or whatever.
Well, if you're doing this, aren't you going to end up with stars with colored halos on them?
Not if you add RGB in down below.
Well, how does that get rid of the halos produced by the narrow band that you have
Because
to
the
scratch?
RGB stars are going to be larger than the narrowband stars.
Now, I have another question. If you know a little bit about the process in PixInsight, when do they reduce some of these scripts to processes?
I have no clue.
I'm sorry, what was the question, Eric?
When did it?
What was that question?
when does PixInsight reduce some of these useful scripts to processes? I use a couple, and it's kind of a bother. You can't keep them open. You just got to run them and close them.
Yeah. That's a pain in the butt.
You can save it to a workspace.
Yeah, me and like 100 other people.
Can I take back my entire presentation and just tell people to buy this?
No.
No,
Because
no,
this
Josh.
does not. Now, Josh, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to step on your presentation.
No, this is awesome.
A lot of people do not have PixInsight, and I still think that for the final, I would use Photoshop to refine, and I think tone mapping is a better method. I do agree with using Stratton, although it does leave artifacts. So I'm not saying that. I was just bringing this up to say, take a look at this. I'm not saying that this is the best method by any means.
No, but it's very cool. It does all this preview so fast. So I like it a lot.
You know,
Hey, Josh, I have a question.
But it's also not going to work right if you do not crop your images first, because it's going to misread your backgrounds.
Okay.
You know, I try to proselytize to PixInsight, and I find that there's such a steep learning curve that people just.
I agree. You're 100% right, and that's why I broke down and bought Keller's tutorials, and then I also am on the forums and I'm looking at other tutorials. I'm taking finding as many tools as I can to get good with it. I mean, I recently found out I was doing something terribly wrong in it. That was totally backwards, and I watched a different tutorial and learned, hey, you're doing this all wrong. But a good example is image combination, and Warren had to rewrite one of his tutorials because I learned in image stacking that it was important to choose a reference image. For a year and a half, I wasn't choosing a reference image.
Really?
Yeah. I didn't know I needed to. I thought, with doing the combination that wasn't necessary. But I learned, I thought about it, and I kind of discovered it on my own after reading something. And I said, you know what, this is going to be like CCD stat. If it doesn't have a reference image to measure for what the background should be and what your brightness levels should be, it's not going to equalize the image values correctly. And so now I'm trying to figure out and take it a step further with weighting of the images. But I still haven't got that mastered. So I agree 100% that PixInsight, that's the hardest thing about it is the learning curve.
Have you guys used the batch pre-processing script?
Don't use batch pre-processing. Batch pre-processing goes exactly to what I just said. If you use batch pre-processing, it's great for getting a normal image, but you want to learn how to do it manually through image integration, because your images will not be weighted correctly and you won't get your best final result. So here's a good example that I like to use. If, let's say, the image combination you use in PixInsight is different based on the volume of frames. So if you have, say, 15 or 10 or more frames of one color, you want to combine that with Windsorized. If you have less than 10, you want to use just a sigma. If you have 20 or more, you want to use linear fit. If you use batch pre-processing, it does not give you any kind of option. You pick one for everything. So that's the first flaw. The second flaw is it does not pick any sort of reference image. It just does them in order. So if your first reference image has got a harsh gradient in it, then it's going to measure all of the other images against that and think that all of them are supposed to have that harsh gradient.
That's not. Can I interrupt you for a second? That's not exactly true. You do pick a reference image, and if you do one narrowband at a time, you select that Windsorized.
I don't see the option in batch preprocess to move the images around.
Oh yeah, you pick your reference.
You pick a reference image for star alignment, but not for normalization.
It's just for registration, like you said, not for the integration portion.
Well, I might have to disagree. I start off doing it one process at a time, and I found that the batch pre-processing for each individual narrowband does as fine a job as I could do individually.
Well, you should. Juan just wrote a big post about this because there was a discussion on the forum, and Juan will tell you that that's wrong. That it's important to do it the other way, and he'll explain the reasons why to you. But and it's something that a lot of users don't understand, and they like batch pre-processing because it's easy. But there's a reason that they flash a warning up to you about not using it for your final production. And if all of your images were taken on the same night in the same conditions, you're probably right. You wouldn't notice a difference. But if you're taking a lot of frames over multiple nights and you've got different gradients and different sky conditions, picking the right reference image for normalization is very important to equalize those images. It's just like I learned in CCD Stack. You pick your best image and then you normalize against it. And then it weights your images accordingly. Batch pre-processing will not do that. So you might want to take a look at Juan's post about that. Why he explains that that's using batch processing for your final imaging is a bad idea.
Yeah,
Well,
I actually
have lots of bad ideas, I guess.
I actually use batch pre-processing script myself, and about 3 or 4 months ago I posted on the PI forum. So I know you guys don't like batch pre-processing script. You suggest that, and they do say that still. It's good for integration. It's good for your calibration frames, but they still like the manual integration for it.
You know, but I actually agree, because sometimes I do go back and I take their registered calibrated images and I will stack them separately, especially when I do it on multiple nights. But on a single night, I find that, as you said, it's as good as me doing them individually.
Yeah, on a single night with narrowband, if the conditions are good, there's probably going to be minimal benefit. I think, as Mike was saying, when you're going over multiple nights and then you're dealing with one good frame and some bad frames, and even when you're deciding which frames are not going to make the cut and which are, that's probably when having a good registration frame, because they're weighing the noise factors off that, right? Like all of those factors that they're looking for.
Sure, they're looking at brightness values.
Yeah.
So if you've got a satellite trail, if you've ever noticed, if you use, and I learned this the hard way, when I was stacking, you know, when I used batch pre-process, I'd be like, I got 1 or 2 frames with the satellite trail through it. Why the hell is it appearing in the final image when I've got 18 images? Well, it's because it was the registration image, and I didn't know it, and so it weighted it equally along with the others as part of the signal.
Well, how does it choose, if you use batch pre-processing, how does it select which image to use?
Whichever's on top.
Whichever's on top, so
In
on
order.
top in your list?
Yep.
Well, then that's an interesting bit of information to know.
But do they let you sort the order?
No, it doesn't in batch pre-processing, but in image integration it does. And Harry taught, I learned this actually by accident watching a Harry's tutorial where he showed how to go through, flip through your images, pick your best image, and then in the image integration you push the button that says set reference, and it moves it to the top.
Yep. Yeah, I know I'm going to want to do some experimenting with that, because I've heard that, and that's one of the things in my imaging goals for 2015. I should have put down manual image integration, because I just want to figure it out.
We all want the easy script, just like the one I just showed you. Does that mean that that's the best way to do it? Not necessarily. It really depends on your data. And that's why I was saying that the way Josh is talking, a lot of times PI is not going to work better. Photoshop is going to work better. So it's good to learn all of the different techniques and tools, to have them in your bag so that you can try different things if you're not getting the result you want.
Well, so can I be clear about this? You have no objection to us using batch pre-processing to do all the calibration and registration.
Oh, I do that.
And then go through and do image integration and select
Correctly.
appropriate sub, and perhaps compare that to what the script does.
Right, and
and
if you,
see
but
what
the only way you're going to know is because I've been playing around with weighting, where I assign weights to images based on the factors, and that's a really tough script to learn. Subframe selector, where you can actually assign weights to images based on the parameters. That's one I have not mastered yet. That's very complex.
I don't know if I'll ever give up CCD stack for assigning good weights to images.
No, CCD stack actually does a pretty darn good job.
They sure do.
And that's what made me think about it in image integration. I'm going, wait a minute, CCD stack, you're measuring the backgrounds, you're measuring the brightness levels, it's comparing all of the images, and it's normalizing them and assigning weights based on that value, you know, to come up with your best image. And it was very hard for me to give up CCD stack at first because I saw those nice areas where it put red all over the image.
Mm-hmm.
And
yeah, I don't know if I'll give that up for my calibrating.
I went to Adam's class for 3 days up on Mount Lemmon, and you know what's funny is as he was going through and showing us how to use all of this, and then at the very end, before he takes it into Photoshop, he goes into PI. He's actually coming out with a tutorial on PI now.
Let me take a second to answer Sean's question about, since it was kind of about tone mapping and this color mapping stuff. Sean asked if about removing stars, especially in faint areas, when you're tone mapping and getting the image ready for color mapping, and that they tend to show up in the faint areas once you start stretching it harder, and then they're a lot harder to remove. Sean, I don't know if you remember quite a while back that who did his inverted screen mask technique for us, where you do kind of a pretty heavy stretch and blur on the data, and that's sort of what I use to deal with those halos and stuff, especially in the faint background areas when I'm tone mapping. I usually I'll be really aggressive on removing the stars with kind of really big dust and scratch filters, and then I will do an inverted screen mask like Scott Rosen showed us, and then do kind of a pretty big blur and noise reduction on that area, and then that mask will make it so only that really small area will show up, or not. You know, the fainter signal area will show up, and it's pretty easy to do a nice smooth transition into the stronger signal areas. Does that answer your question, Sean? Or does it make sense how I was saying that?
Yeah, so you use the inverted screen mask and then a heavy blur on it in the faint areas, is that right?
So I'll remove the stars first with a real aggressive dust and scratches filter, and then I'll do an inverted screen mask stretch with a heavy blur, and then blend that in.
That sounds like a great idea, Josh, because one of the problems with Stratton is it'll leave artifacts.
Right. Yeah, I tried Stratton. You know, and I'm actually interested to hear Eric's idea on this because I know he does some starless images. I don't know. Like I said, I felt like you really need to have a lot of manual techniques in your bag to do a full starless image presentation.
Now, what I originally did is I just went through with JP's process and I just made it into an action. And then I thought the more steps that I would have, the better it would turn out. And actually it produced a worse image. So what I did is I have a series of actions depending on the size of the image that I'm removing stars from. And different numbers of steps and different kinds of steps yield different results. And then you just go in and clean up at the end.
Right. Well, sorry, go ahead.
And then you use that starless image and use that as a high-pass filter at different levels in order to bring back whatever detail you might have lost. And you can see my starless images. That's kind of how they end up. But in the end, you always have to go with the healing brush and get rid of it. There's no way around that.
I was gonna laugh about that. You know, I don't know how many people saw my APOD of the Wizard Starless, and uh, what most people don't know is you don't know how much time I spent with the healing brush fixing artifacts.
Well, of course, I mean, there's no way around that, but you can do 90% of it, but then the last 10% will take you 2 hours getting rid of those things. And then when you layer on your luminosity layer and you see these little halos, then you realize the ones you missed, and you go back and you fix those.
Oh, no, no. The key is once you've already resized the image, and then all of a sudden the guys at NASA say, can you add a star field back in? And you try to register an image without stars.
That's what I had to do. That's what I did on that Pelican. It was brutal.
How do you do that? I mean, unless you want to manually, twiddle with it, I mean, what do? You can't.
It was all manual. It was a pain.
And I had 3 hours to do it.
Hey, so is it just me, or like I get a better result from the clone tool, the clone stamp tool, than I do from the healing brush? Is that just because I don't have very smooth data that's got a lot of noise in it?
No, what you're doing with the healing, what you're doing is just putting in data that isn't there. I'm afraid if you're using the clone tool. I mean, it'll get rid of the stars, but then you're distorting your starless image by doing that.
Where the healing brush is more of a proximity.
Yeah. I mean, the healing brush will produce some artificial results, but still, if you do the clone tool, then you got to have the size and the region, and then, I mean, you're just producing an artificial image that way. By the way, I say that because I did that for a long time, until I discovered the healing brush.
Right, but I was saying the healing brush, when I use it, it just kind of it just makes a blurry area, and I think it's because I don't have enough signal, that there's just noise.
I think that there's definitely something to not having enough signal there, and also the size of it matters a lot too. Like when I'm using the healing brush, at least for me, I'll change the size of the healing brush depending on the star and the halo, and then, like I said, it's just that I think it turns into a very manual technique. I think you go back and forth a bunch of times to get it just right. But as the other thing you pointed out, the hardest areas to deal with are the fainter areas and the fainter stars. And I think they take quite a few steps of going back and forth to really do it right. Eric, I'm trying to find your starless images. Do you have them on your Astrobin?
Yeah, I don't know.
What's a good one to look at?
Well, what's a good one to look at?
By the way, Annie's Astro Actions also has some actions that remove stars, and they do an okay job. They kind of do the same thing. I don't know. I think that like I said, I think there's a lot of manual work in really getting it right.
I did the horse head recently. I'm not real proud of that.
That was my favorite one I did. I think that one came out. And that was the one that I created that tutorial for, but I think there was a good field for doing it for.
I did 1848, the Sol Nebula, using a composite image, and that worked out real well because that was part my data and part Spitzer, and that actually gave a very, very nice image. It's on my gallery.
Do you have the starless versions on them too?
Actually, the one that's I think I like the best is the wide field view of 1805. It's a starless mosaic, and it just, for some reason, it just turned out the best. I see 1805 Heart and Soul Nebula Hubble Palette Starless Mosaic. And we got all the detail in that, and I don't know.
I've got a stars action that someone shared with me. It's not licensed to anybody, but I'll post it up, a link to it when I find it, and it will actually do 2 different steps. It will actually remove stars, which isn't quite as great, but the other one is it will create a layer, and it will allow you to use the opacity slider to control the amount of the stars that show in the image. And it's kind of interesting because you can take the slider and the stars will go in and out based on where you put the slider. But it was an action I think Warren gave me 2 or 3 years ago, and I don't know what the source of it is. It was just called stars, but it works pretty darn good. But I'll post a link to it or post it up on Dropbox and let anybody who wants to play with it.
Yeah, that would be cool. Actually, I think Sean was the one who took one of my images and threw a handful of stars in it and made it look pretty cool by putting a handful of stars into it. I think the horse head comes out starless really well. I like yours too, Eric.
Well, there just aren't a lot of stars, but that image has a lot of star residues, and I'm not really that proud of it. Actually, if you look at the wide field 1805, that one I think came out the best for me, and also the propeller. I did a starless on the propeller too. But the horse egg was kind of a crappy image. I don't know why I even posted it. But you know, you get desperate with 6 weeks of clouds.
Yes.
You wanted to post something.
The horse head is fun to play around with. I don't know if you saw this one that I did, that I made all from HA data. This whole image was just based on HA data.
Yeah, I saw that. I saw that. That's all HA. So how did you get that blue in that little?
It was just doing, like, I used a previous image I had of the horse head as masks and just did a bunch of clipping masks on it. I did clipping masks with layer masks to layer in different colors, and then I based the colors on my previous RGB data. It was one-shot color from a DSLR from last year, and then just kind of use the one-shot color data to actually set the color of the clipping masks. So it was kind of interesting.
You know, I would love to put in my colored stars, but I cannot shoot RGB here.
Not even for stars?
I got such sky glow. I can read a newspaper out in my deck.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm still surprised. I mean,
oh yeah, that's the panorama I was referring to.
Yeah, that one's really cool. It came out well, especially these globules here. These came out really nice.
The little dragon over there, whatever he is.
Yeah.
Well, if you're stuck with HA, Crawford's got a good tutorial on how to turn your magenta stars into, well, non-magenta stars. They're not actually going to be as colorful stars the way Josh demonstrated. But if you're stuck with, and you can't get RGB data, he's got a good method for getting rid of the magenta stars anyway.
I use tone mapping, so I have no colored stars at all.
Sean, I didn't want to skip away from answering that question, Sean. Did that kind of answer what you were asking?
Yeah, if you go back to your horse head image, I'll show you what I'm talking about. It's like the residual, so just to the left of the horse head, right below the cloud. Just up a little bit. So right there.
Yeah,
so like that one, and then there's like, I don't know, 3 to the left of the nebula below it. Like, so when I was trying to use the tone mapping technique, those stars down in the lower signal to noise ratio, like I really struggled with really trying to completely get rid of them, and ended up with like bright areas or just
like this stuff right here.
Yeah, right, exactly.
I don't know. At some point, I guess I just say that it's good enough.
Yeah.
I was pretty happy with how this one came out. I don't know that I would know how to get rid of that other than cloning
Healing
that.
brush.
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not just me. I feel better.
Yeah, I mean, this one I took a long time working on. I think that had a bigger version of it. Maybe I don't remember which one was the bigger version, but yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that to really, really make it just look like there's no stars at all was pretty challenging. Here it is.
Yeah, and I think I struggled a little bit more because I have a 12 nanometer filter.
Right.
You're a bit narrower, so you have smaller stars.
Yeah, I mean, and I guess it sort of has to do with what you're trying to show on it and everything too. But yeah, I think the cleaner your data is, the easier it is to deal with too, for sure. As well as the cleaner your stars are.
There's a couple of things. You brought up a good point here, and that's how wide your filter is. If you do have the 3 nanometer filters, which I have on the big camera, that does make the whole process a lot easier. Also, in Annie's actions, she has reduced star size an action. So if you run that 2 or 3 times, it makes the star removal much more efficient when you get to it.
I agree. I actually used to use only that one, but now I use the astronomy tools make stars smaller, because I found that Annie's Astro Action one will destroy the fine structure in nebula, and it'll give that kind of cellular look to it. And I think that the astronomy tools one does a better job of not touching it. And actually, that new one, who came out with that new action? Somebody came out with a new star reduction tool, which works even better. I can't remember which one.
So I think we agree that if you reduce the star size, then getting rid of stars is a lot easier. But if you have a really bright star, I just leave it alone. I mean, I do the best, and then just leave it there. It just is what it is, because otherwise you just muck up your image trying to get rid of it.
Yeah, you see, I left Allentak in on this one.
Yeah,
I think that's probably what I ran into. Was trying to be overzealous and actually completely remove every remnant of every star.
So if you look, Sean, like the area I was talking about where I do that bigger kind of stretch and inverted screen mask, there's a lot of stars up here, but you can see how smooth this ended up. That's where I did that technique, where I kind of did where I was real aggressive on the star removal and then did Scott Rosen's inverted screen mask. I did that all up in the curtains behind, because I still wanted to actually get to keep the curtain look to it, not just have it be like a giant, kind of blur up top. But it seemed like that worked really well for that area up there. And then for the areas down in here, that was more just a bunch of darken, and then kind of like Eric said, doing some high pass filters to get that detail back in there.
Josh, could you bring up, I can't bring it up here, can you bring up the propeller starless image that I have?
Yes.
That's probably not that one, but the...
In the meantime, I just want to mention Jack on the YouTube channel is asking for our Astrobin IDs, and most of them are our names. I know Eric Coles is Eric Coles, Josh Smith is Josh Smith, Sean Harrison is Sean Harrison, I'm Adam Jaffe or Footbag, Mike Miller, I believe, is Mike Miller.
No, the best place to find mine is on my website for my images, which is remarkableheavens.com.
There you go. Hopefully that answers his question. I didn't want to interrupt you, Josh. Sorry.
That's okay, Eric. I saw the black and white propeller, but I didn't see the color. This one?
Yeah, is that it? That looks like it.
I don't know if there's a starless version or not.
Oh, that's
A different propeller?
I can't find anything. I don't know, but it's probably one of the best.
Oh wait, here it is.
And the reason that works out is that's such a modeled image to begin with all those colors, that you don't have to be quite as precise in getting rid of all the minute stars.
Right.
It was a lot easier to work with.
This one's cool. It reminds me of what's that one that I think Mad Ratter did a version of the green. What's the one that comes out green a lot of times, like just the green painting looking image?
I don't know. An emission nebula?
Yes, I think it's over by the wall. Over by the wall.
Yeah, below the wall, right directly below the wall. I don't know the designation. I know what you're talking about. Alex shot that recently.
Yeah,
yes.
570, I think. It's on my website. Oh, is it? I'm trying to think of the name of it. I don't know how to share my screen on an iPad, so.
Here, I can look it up on yours, if that's okay. I'm never quite sure about looking other people's pictures up and sharing them on here.
Well, you're going to go to hell if you do that.
I know.
I don't know what that is. It's below the Cygnus wall?
Yeah.
Yeah, keep going down.
Holy smokes, what's this music? Is this on your website?
Yeah.
It was in Alex's presentation from the other week. But I don't know what it is.
I know exactly what it is because I put it up and I got told it was really lacking a lot of info. Or it wasn't very interesting. Must not be. Maybe I didn't even post it.
Well, I was very distracted. I was flying away in Star Trek.
Well, you can bring up my horse set on that my Starless horse set I just did.
What is that on?
It's under, if you go into the other page under New. And you'll see I cheated on those star artifacts.
You used a clone tool?
Under New.
Oh, nice colors.
So I had the same problem as he did. I just cheated and used the healing brush.
It's Eric. By the way, can I make one correction to the presentation today?
Yes.
Bob Frankie?
Oh, Bob Frankie.
Yes. I've talked to Bob. It's Frankie as in Yankee, as he says.
Oh, I wish he corrected me while I was saying that.
No, I thought we'd save it till later. I was going to
Can I
type
ask one last question?
Yeah.
Just so, can you guys see my screen at all?
No.
No.
Oh, crud. Trying to.
No, now we can. Oh, wait, no, we can't. Yes, we
You
can.
can see it now?
If
Okay,
you click
so-
Sean's screen, you can. It's Sean's name. You can. Yes.
Okay, so one thing I ran into with trying to do the tone mapping, after doing the inverted screen mask and the dust and scratches, I ended up with these little dark speckles. I don't know if you can see that on my screen. Do you know what it is that's causing that?
Did you do any kind of star reduction? It just I mean, it looks sort of like kind of some of those actions introduce that kind of dark speckle.
Yeah. The star reduction like reduces the noise somehow. That could be what's going on.
You could try to use the despeckle filter, and it might help that out some. But that looks like it's too well defined to really help it out a lot.
You think it's in the star reduction?
Yes.
Is where it's
When
coming
I
from?
do, yeah, when I do my star reduction in PixInsight with morphological transformation, if I forget to use a star mask where I'm only applying it to the stars, that's what it looks like. That's what it kind of spits out. So when it does like a star reduction on the overall image as opposed to just the stars.
Okay, great. Give me something to work on.
Yeah, so you can, like Adam said, you can either put a star mask where you're only revealing the stars when you do that reduction, or just don't do it, I guess.
One of the great things about Photoshop to learn how to do is always duplicate your layer. You can do a hide all or reveal all mask and paint in the areas that you want. and leave out the areas you don't.
Yep.
Yeah, I think I need to work on my masks a little bit more.
I spend 80 to 90% of processing every image and creating masks. So the majority of my time in processing is done in creating masks. Why I don't know when I'll ever be comfortable in PI.
You'll convert to the dark side.
I almost did.
I like the way PI applies masks, and making a luminance mask in PI is simple as anything, but star masks are a little bit more tedious to create. I feel like it should be easier.
Good star masks, you mean?
Star masks are difficult to create in PI, yeah.
You mean
I
good
still
ones?
struggle with them. You either get the little ones or you get the big ones. It's hard to get both.
Yeah, and I know Hytham suggests combining 2 star masks, one for the little and one for the large, and it just seems like a big pain. Like, and yes, sometimes I haven't done that yet, but like I'm getting to the point where I really think I have to do what I want to. Or you can reduce your small stars and then you can reduce your large stars, but it seems tedious.
Guys, I gotta go, but thank you so much, Josh.
Thanks, John.
Your presentation was awesome. Mike, Eric, thanks everybody for participating. It was a really great session.
Have a good one.
Take care, Tom.
Hey, Adam, when we're done with this, could I ask you a couple of questions? You brought something up about the...
Sure, and it's actually 11:30, so I want to. We have 6 YouTube viewers, but I think we're pretty much done with the presentation. So, sorry to boot you guys. If you guys have something important to say or ask, you're welcome to come into the live presentation. I think you could probably get in, but I am going to stop the broadcast now. So, thanks for coming. We'll have another session next week, and we hope to see you then.